So let's begin. Ned, thank you for being part of our program. Everybody, Ned Stearns, Alpha Alpha 7 Alpha, is the ARRL Vice Director for the Southwest Division. He's also NCDXF Vice President and has been on many DXpeditions. I was privileged to be on one with him to Baker Island. Saw another side of Ned. He's just a tremendously gifted technologist. And I guess we both learned together about the importance of FT8, how it's changing the world of DXpeditions. So that's his topic for today. And I'm going to turn it over to you and give you the floor. Away you go.
Okay, I'm going to try to do what I did before.
Yep.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, good evening, good morning to everybody out there. First, I want to thank Northern Cal Contest or Northern Cal DX Club for pulling off this really amazing program today. It's really been fun to participate in so far today. We'll see how this program goes, but what I want to do is to relate a story. Really, it's kind of one of the more interesting things I've ever done in ham radio, is to be involved in the development of a new capability in ham radio. I'm a retired communications engineer, built lots and lots of stuff, but I've never had the opportunity to make a change to my world like I had on FT8 DXpedition mode. I want to talk about it and how it represents some interesting new technology that can change DXing forever. Let me start with a little bit of history about FT8. I've been involved in digital modes my whole ham radio career. I made it to digital honor roll on RTTY. It's a hard thing to do. And I've also operated a RTTY on DXpeditions, another hard thing to do. It's a challenging mode, and anybody who's accomplished DXCC or gotten on honor roll should be proud of what they've done. But it's going to change. I was, in addition to all the other things I did in ham radio, I was also very much into moon bounce. I started moon bouncing, I don't know, about 35 years ago, and kind of operated only CW for a lot of years. And then somewhere around in the early 2000s, Joe Taylor showed up on the scene. Apparently in a moment of boredom, he taught himself how to do C programming, and he rolled out this capability to operate a mode called JT44 that sort of revolutionized weak signal work related to moon bounce and other weak signal modes in the VHF spectrum. JT44 was kind of fun. It was like playing anagrams. You would send messages and you would decode things, and you would stare at the screen. You'd try to figure out what was being received and sort of piece together parts of exchange, and then convince yourself that you completed a QSO and you got enough stuff that you like to see. Soon after that, though, he developed a new version of it called JT65, which eliminated a lot of the uncertainty. What it recorded, what it decoded was honest to goodness, real information that you could trust. There was an algorithm called it's a soft decision algorithm, which is sort of like guessing, where it produces answers which are more than likely correct. Now, some will say that's sort of cheating. You're using information that you didn't receive over the air. But if anybody's ever operated a CW pilot, you most of the time you're guessing on the calls anyway. And so it's a common approach to weak signal or stressed communication anyway. It's just a different way of doing it. Any skilled operator will know that you can't complete a QSO with somebody who's not there. So in order to complete a QSO, you really have to get honest information sent across the channel. Now, when JT65 was deployed, it was just a heyday of change in the moon bounce world. And things were every day, every update to the software, newer and better things were happening, and life was good. And then it kind of stalled for me personally, and no new updates. And then I found out that Joe Taylor had succumbed to the pressure from the community outside of Moonbounce and asked for a version of this software JT65 to work on HF, and that's what he was quietly working on. And then soon after it was 2004, 2005, I forget which, the WSJT-X software package was released, and it became sort of the starting point for a lot of change in the digital modes on the HF spectrum. The first product was a version of it, JT65, that works on HF, and it was kind of fun. And it invented what I call the 6-minute QSO. Anybody who worked JT65 will distinctly recall spending 6 minutes to complete a contact that really only took seconds, but it was being done digitally, so it was cool. But you found that you had a lot of time to do all kinds of other things like mow the lawn and check your email and all kinds of other stuff. You sometimes would forget you're in the middle of a QSO when you did that. Some changes were made to the protocol to streamline it to 4 minutes, but it was interesting, but it just wasn't, the next great thing. But as time went on, Joe Taylor and this cadre of software specialists kept working on new ideas, and they were working on a version of JT65-like mode called FT8 that would streamline the communication process and to be able to complete QSOs in 1 minute. That was their objective. And the purpose for that kind of number was for it to be helpful in making QSOs on 6 meters during sporadic E-openings, where openings often would be in the neighborhood of 1 minute and maybe sometimes less. And so JT65 was just not getting the job done. And so to get more traction in completing QSOs, the new FT8 waveform signaling protocol was developed that sacrificed a little bit of sensitivity in order to get QSOs completed under a minute. And it rolled out in July of 2017, just after the summer sporadic E season was over, but it was picked up by the HF crowd and it took over the planet. And most of you essentially recall how things have changed ever since then. After a year or so of that being deployed, Joe went out to the community and asked for ideas on how to use this technology to help DXpeditions. The idea of a 1 minute QSO and a DXpedition is not a really attractive idea. So he was looking for ideas on how to modify the software to help in DXpeditions, and work on that started around 2018. Just to show how its arrival on the scene, FT8 just automatically out of the chute just changed everything. I have a diagram here where I plot the log of the world uploads by mode in the months of March. In blue is 2017, which is before FT8 was deployed, and then a year later, only 5 or 6 months after the release of FT8, the orange bars are for uploads in the month of March, when there was FT8 present. And as you can see, in a 1 year's time, it resulted in essentially QSO rates. If you use log of the world uploads as a measure of activity on the band, it essentially equaled that of CW and was close to that on sideband. So it just broke out of the gate and took off running. And if you watched Michael's talk earlier today about Club Log, the plots are well beyond that now. It is the dominant mode on the bands. Now, I'm going to talk about the FT8 DXpedition mode development that I had a chance to operate. One of my more recent DXpeditions was with the Intrepid DX group to South Sandwich and South Georgia Islands in 2018. And I was invited to the team to be the CW team lead, but I ended up not doing any CW because I put together such a good plan of CW operators, which the team was mostly, and there was nobody left to operate RTTY. And so I spent a lot of my time operating RTTY and developed yet more experience on how that mode operates on a top 10 DXpedition. If you're not familiar with what a top 10 DXpedition is, if you look at the most needed countries in the world, and there are many lists of them out there, Club Log has one. And what the top 10 one is number 1 through 10 on that list. And those are places that everybody wants to work. You know, there are teams that spend a lot of time and energy to figure out how to plan, develop a plan to put those on the air. And when you get there, you need to perform. And because there is a demand for QSOs on the RTTY and now digital mode, you have to have a plan in place to operate that. But I got to tell you, it's not the glory position. When you're on a DXpedition and you're in the RTTY position, unless you're a super serious RTTY operator, it's maybe not the best spot to be. It's really hard work. I mean, it has its own unique challenges. As I recall, when I fired up the station on South Sandwich Island on a 30-meter band, that was the first band. We picked only 2 bands. We operated on 15 and 30 because we didn't want to have people filling in bingo slots for working, that mode on every single band. We focused on just 2 bands, 15 and 30 meters, in order to provide the opportunity for an all-time new one for digital or RTTY operators. And so we focused on just 2 bands. So we fired up for the first time on the 30-meter band. And I remember our original frequency plan was to operate, 5 or 6 kilohertz down from the bottom of the band. And I called CQ listening up, and people called us upwards of 50 kilohertz outside of the band. It was almost as high as 20 meters. But the pileups are just absolutely insane for a top 10 DXpedition. All the signals are that you copy, they're all about the same amplitude, and they're everywhere. If you ever tried to rely on some software decoder, RTTY decoder, to successfully carve out one call sign, you're lucky. If you operate a lot of RTTY chase a lot of RTTY DXpeditions, you'll see quite often where you think the operator's gone to sleep because he doesn't make a QSO for 2 or 3 minutes, and that's because the decoder doesn't produce anything you can use. And that was happening to me while I was sitting there at that position. And so I did, what any contest guy would do. I start to run stations using partial calls, and I'm constantly typing in and editing the call sign entry field, and just treating it like a CW pileup under stressful conditions. And I got to tell you, I mean, you're sitting on an Arctic island. There's a hurricane outside. There are penguins squawking like you can't believe. Your fingers are falling off from frostbite, and you're trying to work RTTY under intense conditions. It's just hard. It's hard on the operators. It's really, really challenging, and you get stressed to the max. And this is why you don't find operators striving to go sit in that position. It's just a hard thing to do. But we did it. We plugged it out. We plugged our way through it. We did the best we could do with all of the constraints we had. The other problems are RTTY stations are a little complicated. They got, a lot more interfaces than sideband and CW, and you have to deal with those. And, an example we had here on this expedition was that the equipment that we brought didn't have the appropriate pinouts or interfaces to manage the laptops that were brought. So we could not use the brand new laptops that we had provided. Someone had to go into their knapsack, pull out their email laptop, and this one we used was a Japanese laptop. So it was a mini screen, mini keyboard, and you're sitting there, you take your gloves off, and my fingers, kind of wrote over the top about 5 or 6 keys on the keyboard, but it just added to the complexity. You're dealing with, not the station you have at home, but the only thing that you can get to run when you get out to the field. So it just is a challenge. And the other problem is, like I said before, the city's RTTY signal can get weak and hard to decode, and it's hard to get a clean capture of a good call. And it just adds to the challenge. And to point this out, I'm going to show some data from some recent top 10 DXpeditions that I pulled from, information available on the network. And an example towards the bottom is Heard Island, VK0EK in 2016. They made 75,000 total QSOs and only 3,300 on RTTY. So it's around 4% of their total activity is on CW, or excuse me, on RTTY. And in general, it's less than 10% of the the number of QSOs is in the digital modes. Those that are higher than 10% are generally European run expeditions, but this is the general shape of the results from top 10 DXpeditions. And so I wrote a kind of or responded to a team asking me my opinions on RTTY and on DXpeditions, and I sort of had the opinion that it really needs to be replaced with something else that really is better suited for the task. I mean, RTTY is based on a keying, a signaling technology from the late 19th century, and it was designed to operate on private line, on carrier on wires, okay, not sent over the electromagnetic spectrum. The waveform is wide, and it's just not conducive to operating it, using it well under stressful conditions. It's just not it's not designed to operate on HF, and you see, if you look at the spectrum, you'll see some signals that are very, very wide on RTTY if they don't control the keying rates or the slopes of the signal. It's just not conducive to operating a pilot where you got thousands and thousands of signals that are very wide, all spreading over the top of each other. It's very tough, and something different was needed. So when Joe Taylor and his team went out to the development community, asked, well, does anybody have any ideas what to do? I shared my feelings about this whole thing, and I was about the only one that mentioned anything like this. So they said, well, tell you what, why don't you put together a bunch of what you think should be done to make a mode for FT8 that works on DXpeditions, and we'll run with that. So as it turns out, I was just been selected to join the KH1 Baker Island team for 2018, and so I went to the team, the DXpedition team, says, is anybody interested in helping me develop a waveform or a mode, it's essentially a mode, a submode, that we could deploy on our DXpedition, and it might help to be just another aspect of our really cool DXpedition we got coming up. And I got about half the team really interested in helping me put together, put in some effort to help determine the requirements and help test it and all that sort of stuff. So we published a requirements document in August 2017. The development team worked on it for a couple of months, and they came up with their initial version. And we went through a series of testing over the course of 4 months, and it's kind of cool. I mean, I never done anything like this. It's almost like, okay, so we're going to test it. So I gotta go get a pilot, so I gotta go get a bunch of people to download this latest version, and at some particular time on some particular frequency, we're going to have a DXpedition pilot, and that kind of was cool. We ended up having, I don't know, 400 or 500 people participate in the testing of this new version of software, and the final version was released. Well, actually, not the final, sort of final, in May of 2018. We went out on our DXpedition and fired up in the end of June of 2018. As it turns out, there was a version update just before we got off the boat that we had to quickly crank in. But that's the nature of software these days. You got to be ready to go. But it was just an exciting thing to add to the DXpedition, and we had a chance to put it on the air for the first time. So what's really different about FT8 DXpedition mode? Well, first off, there's two ways to play. You can play in one of two roles. You can either be the Fox, which is the DXpedition operator, or you can be one of the many hounds that's chasing the Fox, trying to put the Fox's call in the log. And that's really different. If you look on any FT8 channel, you see there's a lot of traffic on there, but there's one person working one person. On a DXpedition pileup, you got one person trying to work 10,000 people. It's really a different kind of environment. And one of the things that we all complain about in DXpedition is people transmitting on top of the DXpedition when they're transmitting. One thing neat about the mode is one of the requirements we've had was that there's discipline. The Fox always transmits in the first sequence. Hounds are forced to only transmit in the second. That eliminated that problem. Transmitting on the wrong frequency, well, we thought we had this figured out. as it turns out, in a 3 kilohertz spectrum where the mode is operated. Above a kilohertz are where all the hounds live, and below a kilohertz are where QSOs are done, where the Fox always transmit, and the stations identified by the Fox to be worked also end up transmitting. So that helped to a degree to help QRM. Now the problem is, if someone's not using the right version of software or the right version but the wrong mode, they can transmit on the wrong frequency, and I can't fix that. And that was a lot of as an issue for the DXpedition team to get that kind of working. But it eventually will become second nature to everybody to do that. But when you got it going on that thing, QSOs can be completed in less than a minute. But what's neat is that more than one QSO can occur at the same time. And on any particular stream, we can have essentially 2 ongoing QSOs in each stream. And with a new capability that the development team worked on, we can have up to 5 ongoing streams in process. So the rates the theoretical rates that we could achieve with this new mode was up to 400 QSOs per hour, which rivals even the best of CW or sideband operators. So it's really an exciting idea. So this was used for the first time in the KH1 expedition, and the results of that are listed here. In that we made the largest number of digital QSOs ever made in a DXpedition, but the percentage of all of our QSOs was almost 30%, which is out of the chute, first time ever used. It made this kind of an impact, and these were easy QSOs. I mean, painless. In fact, the DXpedition team called the tent where the digital modes were operated, they called it the digital palace, because you sat there and it was relaxing. The breeze would drift through, and you'd quietly, rack 200 QSOs an hour. It was just a joy, and it's really has the opportunity to change the game. The other thing that was kind of interesting about this is that the number of all-time new ones or people on the mode was amazing. We were many thousand all-time new ones were handed out to Europeans on this mode that contacted us only on this mode and not on CW or sideband. So it really has opened up the door for a lot of DXers out there to work rare expeditions. Now, some of the capabilities that are really important, though, about FT8 DXpedition mode are the following. You really do need to upload logs often. We adopted a once a day upload of logs. We posted that. It's a lot of complexity when you're at a site like we were at. You can't have real-time access to the internet out there for lots of reasons. A, it's expensive, and B, if you do, all your laptops will automatically want to update their software on you, and it just out of your stations get out of control. You really want your logging apps, desktop or laptops to be offline. So we would have a process by which all logs were collected and then uploaded on a system that wasn't going to result in changes to any of the computers out there. The other challenge is that operating FT8 and logging requires you to have more than one application trying to control the radio, and so you have to work out a process of getting a multiplexing serial data rig control through a single COM port. There's lots of different ways to do that, but you got to figure it out. The other thing that's important is timing. The FT8 requires your computer clock to be within a second or a second and a half of everybody else's time. And so without a network, one of the best ways to do that is using a GPS discipline network clock, which is what we did. We acquired one, put it on our network, and all the laptops got their time from this time server. The other problem is that FT8 is a very, very high duty cycle mode, and that station is going to be transmitting at a very high duty cycle, and you will suffer new levels of interference with all your other traditional modes. And so you have to make sure you provide some isolation in some manner, because you really want to be on the same bands as sideband and CW, but you want to all share the spectrum in a way where you can each make QSOs at the rate you want. So let me kind of go over the station that we put together for the KH1 operation, which is going to be sort of a process that every DXpedition will need to consider before they shove off on a DXpedition. You can't figure this stuff out when you get there. You got to have it kind of well thought out, assembled, tested, rehearsed before you go. All right, so our basic approach was we had a combination of wired and wireless LAN. Wired was for all stations on land. We made the decision to put a couple of operating positions out on the boat, which is kind of a new idea, but we had a lot of constraints in our DXpedition. We had a requirement to have a limited number of our operators be able to be on the island at any one time, and to permit us to have a very well-staffed team on the air. We had to have the provision for putting a couple of operators on the air from control points on the boat. And so part of the network was to have a wireless bridge to from the boat to the island. We also, because of the need for daily uploads, we wanted to make the log collection and uploading process be possible and sort of seamless. So we needed to have all FT8 QSOs that were created end up in our logging application, which we selected for as N1MM plus for this expedition. And that's pretty well known technology these days. Everybody knows how to do that. Anyway, so that's kind of the basic set of requirements we had for the KH1 system to support that. Here's sort of the layout on the island. We had some significant distances between the tents in order to get us some isolation. We couldn't use cross-polarization isolation. Again, constraints to our DXpedition team placed on us by the Fish and Wildlife that we couldn't put up horizontal antennas, only verticals. I guess somehow birds flew into horizontal antennas, but not into vertical antennas or something. I don't know. But without having cross-polarization, the only tool on your belt to get isolation is distance. And so these were the distances that we elected for our setup. So to put the whole thing together simply, we essentially we pre-built all of the networks in transit cases, all the network hardware. So when we got to the island, we just essentially built the network first and then started attaching positions to the network. And to get the wired LAN to work over these long distances, you had to use repeaters, Ethernet repeaters, to get these distances. Here's kind of the look of the entire network in my workbench before we left. Now, lots and lots of other unique aspects of this DXpedition, which are kind of interesting. We had requirements again from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife to clean everything that we were going to take to the island had to be processed to a very, very specific set of requirements. And one of the requirements was that we had to wipe down all of the cables. So to do that, we had to essentially unroll Cat6 cable from one roll and then roll it on another one after we wiped it. So we had, every single thing we brought had to go through some process of being cleaned and prepared and then stored in a special way to prevent any undesirable materials like seeds or things to get into anything you take onto the island, which may upset the ecosphere out there. I mean, the Baker Island is a bird sanctuary. I mean, one of the most amazing bird sanctuaries I've ever seen. And Fish and Wildlife is religious about preserving that, having learned from lots and lots of other experiences what not to do. Another element of this of cleaning was, and it's a kind of a funny part of it, is that all of our clothes had to be specially prepared before we put them on the island. They had to be frozen for a period of, I think it was 48 hours, and then kept in a sealed bag until we pulled them out of the bag and used them on the island. So everybody on the island had their underwear frozen up to a couple of weeks before the expedition. Lots of unique aspects of this expedition, but as you'll see soon, I made some use of some of that. So here's an example of our core network transit case. It contains the router, the time standard, and the wireless bridge station that would connect out to the boat. Here's an example of one of the repeater stations, and weatherproofing was provided by one of the recently freed up baggies that not too long ago had my underwear in it. And here's the central sort of the hub site on the island, the sideband tent where the router module was located, and we had 900 megahertz IP bridge link antenna located there. The boat was anchored offshore, not too far from here. And we had to use omni antennas because you never know which way the wind would blow and the boat would spin around on its anchor. And we couldn't use Yagis or horizontal antennas. We had to stick with verticals. And that turned out to be a problem. Turns out that as the boat would spin around slowly, every once in a while, you get to a complete, total destructive interference and the whole signal would drop out. We learned from this DXpedition that was a problem, a real world concern, and that we had to deal with that going forward. But it turned out to be a prohibitive problem for us on this expedition. But it's important to talk about it here because we learned from it, and some improvements in this networking were proposed and now tested, and you'll see the results of that in the very next talk here this afternoon with George Wallner's team at the next talk. So here's, again, there's so many details to this sort of thing, but the IP architecture is important to set up beforehand to make sure that the system comes up without conflicts, without any of the devices on the network having a conflict, and so that you can troubleshoot problems when they appear, having knowledge of the overall plan. Now, each individual station gets a little complicated because each station, some stations have to support many modes. Like this particular station has to support sideband CW, FT8, and RTTY. And so there's just lots of cables, lots of devices, and you really have to make sure that every single one of these devices gets to the island and gets connected correctly, or you end up with a useless pile. Lots and lots of logistics associated with a large expedition when you have this kind of inclusion of this kind of technology in it. The other aspect is, making sure you have the right operating plan so that you know what modes can be run on what stations using, wherever they are, and including the ability to be able to sit down at one or two stations on a boat is very important. So you got to make sure that you've got the right addressing scheme set up, and you also think you need to have the right software loads on each of the computers, and there's quite a few. As you can see, we have a dozen computers on the network for this DXpedition, and I might take a second here to talk about something here. And one of the big challenges on a large expedition like this, with as much information that is going to flow on the network, is that you got to worry about the ability of any of these computers to handle the network traffic. N1MM Plus has a really cool feature, which is that it will synchronize logs on every work position in your network. But what is not very well known is that traffic on the network scales up quickly when you have upwards of a dozen nodes or running instances of N1MM Plus. And also the log files get to be very, very large. 50,000 QSOs is much larger than contest log files get. So that having both large number of QSOs and large number of stations, you get this multiplicative effect, and the traffic that we were seeing at the end of the DXpedition was really crazy. And some of the i3 level CPU positions were really choked out. They just sometimes it would be 3 or 4 seconds between when you stroked a key and when anything actually happened on the screen. So it's just something you got to deal with. And I'd recommend moving on to i5 level minimum processors for DXpeditions of this sort. But that's just my opinion. The other thing is that when something breaks, you got to figure out what it is. And if you're, if you didn't have intimate knowledge of the design of the stations, you would not know what to do. It's not trivial. I mean, there are a lot of these virtual COM port links that are set up for COM port sharing. And as a result of the complexity, I turned out that one of my roles was a 24/7 you fix it guy, and I would constantly be running between tents, making sure everything was running. But I had these plasticized cards on each station that indicated what the configuration of each position was, and it's very, very important to have this well nailed down and running and documented so that you can repair it when it breaks. So just something to keep in mind. So some operating tips about using FT8 DXpedition mode on a DXpedition. I'll go over a few of them. Most of you probably have done DXpedition mode as a hound, but on the Fox side, the job of the operator is to feed queues. All right, so here's a desktop from our position, and let me kind of map around a little bit. Let me try and map around a little bit. So here's essentially what you'll see is in the right-hand screen, you'll see the traffic on the channel of anybody calling you. You'll see, what you're transmitting, and you'll see what the people you're operating are sending back to you. On the left side of the screen are just a list of the stations that have been decoded, and it's your job to select those calls from the queue list. Somebody's needs to mute. Thank you. You need to select the calls from the this queue list to go into another queue, which is what the software will put in line to be worked as a slot opens up in the timing of in the protocols. So there's lots of different ways to look at that data. This is kind of a quiet moment. I've had, sometimes you'll have upwards of 100 people decoded at any one time. Just some amazing stuff. But what's available to you is some tools. There's a drop-down box over on the right-hand side called signal noise ratio. What that does is it will help order that list. It will order it. That particular option is to order it from high signal noise ratio down to low signal noise ratio. There's another one which is distance. So if you're in a point in time when you want to be working Europe, you might sort by distance so that you're going to get to your target audience when it's time to work that target audience. So you have some tools at your advantage, but it primarily the Fox's role is to stage the queues, get the queues filled with the right call signs so they get worked. Another kind of cool thing is to make sure you have your network, see the traffic or the activity on all of the other positions. And it was kind of fun to be sitting here at the digital position and just, tittering a little bit when you found that you're at double or 3 times the rate of some poor guy on CW slaving away on CW piles. You're sitting here calmly having a drink and having 3 times the QSO rate. It's kind of fun. Some strategies. One of the things that we worked on in the development of the submode was how do you make sure, or how do you complete a QSO? And our rallying cry of the team was that it should be like it is on CW. There's 2 ways to end a QSO. If you're trying to work a weak DXpedition on 160, and the operator is a good operator, that good operator will make sure that he completed a QSO with you. And he will not move on to the next QSO until he's done with you. So there's 2 ways to know you're done. One is that you heard, your call being sent, or that he's moved on to the next guy, and you almost have to assume that he did finish with you because he's working the next guy. And that's very important. It's kind of an implicit 73 or Roger Roger or whatever you want to call it. It's implied. That's the way it is on CW. We're all used to it, and that's the way it has to be in a DXpedition mode for this mode. DXpedition mode for this for FT8 DXpedition mode. So so there's a but how do you decide to move on to the next guy? The logic that was picked by Joe Taylor and the team was essentially 3 strikes and you're out. They're going to try to send you the message you want to hear up to 3 times until they get from you acknowledgement that you received it. And after the 3rd time, they move on to the next guy. And what you probably don't know is that you're in the log. And you wouldn't know that until you check to see that you're on the overnight update of logs. But there's no sense trying to finish the QSO after 3 subsequent transmissions from the Fox, because he won't be talking to you. He's moving to the next guy. So some people will sit there and send a report for hours, and it's a waste of time. What you need to do if you really want to assure you have a QSO is to go back to the beginning, start with a fresh sequence and start to work them again. And it has to be okay by the Fox to rework stations. It has to be. The rate is high. You're going to work everybody eventually. Don't worry about QSO before. Just keep working the guys until they stop calling you. That's the best way to do that. That's even, you know, on CW it annoys you to have to work a guy 7, 8, 9 times, but on FT8 is not much stress and strain on that. Just get it done. Just do it, and they will be happy, and they'll be in the log. They're going to be in the log if you get what you want. Their call sign is going to be in your log, but they will disappear from the pile if you do spend the energy to finish the QSO on their end as well. But the important part is to just decide when you want to start a new QSO if you really want to get in it. Try to make that QSO again. A problem that occurred a lot for us since we were the first time it was ever used is that people were calling us with the wrong version of software. We broadcast this as much as we possibly could. We even sent messages as we were CQing, please version 1.9.1. We did everything we could to get people to use it, but you just can't get it all the time, get it right. So we make sure that you're always using the latest version. There's JTDX out there. They try to keep, they are currently in sync with WSJT-X. So either of those software packages will work, but you can't work DXpedition mode QSOs if you aren't in DXpedition mode. Frequency plans, it's a big topic. I spent a lot of energy trying to find a place to put our activity. And after studying the problem for quite a while, it was clear that the plan was to replace RTTY with this approach. So we operated it pretty much in RTTY frequencies. I mean, RTTY contests happen almost every weekend, and DXpeditions operate RTTY, and where RTTY is currently active. So FT8 DXpedition mode should land where RTTY can operate, and that's essentially what we did. But you run into problems. Not every country in the world can operate digital modes on every frequency like everybody else. So you have to spend some time finding out where the restrictions are to make sure you offer an opportunity for everybody everywhere to work you. And your frequency plan has to be consistent with that objective. Here's the plan we had for the KH1 DXpedition. Now at the time, 160 was a problem, and that JA operators could not transmit below 1900 and on digital modes. And so we had to operate split to work JA on that DXpedition, and we couldn't use DXpedition mode when we operated split. So we had to have special concerns placed for that problem. Now Japan has subsequently fixed that. They now operate digital modes down between 1836 and 1840, or 1840, 1844. That problem has gone away, but I think Korea still has a problem, and there are other problem childs in that. So the important thing here is to find a frequency plan that works for your target audience and follow that plan as best you can. All right, there's a lot of new things coming out that that have been added to WSJT-X and some of them into JTDX and others. One is the some of the VHF contest modes where you can pass grid squares and all kinds of other stuff. You can operate in field day and a couple of ARRL contests and maybe a few others. It's not the full complement of contests, but they are slowly becoming adapting to or maybe making their own version set of rules for exchanges for digital modes using FT8 and FT4. There's also a new waveform called Q65, which is coming out, which should revolutionize EME on 6 meters and 2 meters yet again. And so things are continuously evolving in this arena. Now, remote DXpedition operation. Now that we tried to operate remote, we tried to put in place everything necessary to do it. We didn't actually do it, but our objectives were good. It was a good idea, and it was a good place to test a few ideas, which have been picked up by other teams, and they're moving forward with this idea. So why would you do remote DXpedition operations? Well, you know, like our challenges on Baker is that we had a lot of constraints on the number of people out on the island. It wasn't zero, it was a number, but we started the operation, it was a number less than the number of people that were on the boat. And so we had to provide this capability. There are some islands which won't allow operations at night. And so there needs to be the capability of operating ham radio, meeting all requirements for you know, for local law without actually being on the island. And so you're going to hear more about that in the next DXpedition. But part of that that we did get to was what I call the well, a single op multi-radio operation. Now I know I just following the contest team, and you have these operators that can operate multiple radios on multiple bands, and they're special people. I don't know how they do that, but if they were using FT8, it would be trivial. Here's an example of, you know, like this is on day 3, we realized that we didn't need an operator per station. One of the operators could operate both stations at max rate, and carrying that to the extreme, we felt that a single operator could run FT8 DXpedition mode on 3 or 4 positions. So the number of people that you might need on an expedition that use, you know, FT8 DXpedition mode might be substantially reduced. And so the kind of the cartoon here is to be all on the boat, have a wireless bridge to the island, and have all of the hardware, you know, the power generator equipment, the antennas, and everything on the island, and save yourself from having to provide protection and sleeping quarters and feeding facilities and porta potties and everything else for all those people on the island. It's an attractive idea that whose time has come, and I think we're going to find that may become a very, very common approach in DXpeditions coming your way soon. So with that, I will entertain questions. If my moderators return, we can maybe work on any questions that
we're here. Yes, we are. That's a wonderful presentation. Thank you. Let's see. We've got Robert Fonfant. You might know him. From what you say, can you read that yourself? Maybe on the chat, you can read it. He says, from what you say, the fox will only try to work a hound 3 times and then gives up on the hound if a receive signal isn't received. Why is WSJT not modified and prevent the hound from continually endlessly calling the fox down in his working area and gumming up the working area?
Sorry, there is some human intervention involved in running FT8. Humans do actually have to do the right thing. It's not completely automatic. But you're right. You know, some people get on and we'll send a call, try to finish that QSO for an hour, and the weird thing is the fox doesn't see it. They don't see it. It isn't there. Oh, actually, no. I'm sorry. That's not true. You do see it in the queue. You see it, and you try to help them, but they're already in the log, and you know, you kind of have to decide. Well, should I dupe a guy or should I work a new guy? And you hope the guy sees his call in the log overnight and doesn't call you tomorrow. Or if there's not much else to do, work them again. It kind of all depends on what's going on at the time.
We've got a couple of folks who are asking the same questions. Do you anticipate FT8 only DXpeditions?
Yep.
There's one coming up. There's a group from Italy that say they're going to Monaco, and I think they're primarily going to be operating FT8. In your description, of course, the Fox can control to some extent the stations that are worked. I can imagine a group from North America going to Monaco and operating and primarily targeting North America, since it's a very rare country.
Well, that's one of the interesting things about JTDX is they have a lot of filtering. You can filter by continent or a lot of other things, or filter out dupes. In fact, not even show people that you've already worked. And the problem with filters is the Fox doesn't get the whole story. They are masked from information they might need to make good decisions. And if I can do anything to users of JTDX use filters judiciously, they're fine when you're DXing and you're sitting at home, but on a DXpedition, having the dupes turned off means that someone who doesn't know that they worked you has no way at all to ever work you if they really feel they need to. There's just no way to do it. And so I recommend not having the dupe, don't decode dupes or disable, don't enable that on a DXpedition. But it's, yes, the Fox operator can decide, has all the power to decide what QSOs take place. One of the filters I wanted to add to that drop-down list, I mentioned this to Joe Taylor. I said, you got it by distance, you got it by signal to noise ratio. Can we have an ordered list based on how much that individual contributed to the DXpedition? I thought that would be really handy.
That's great.
Very important information.
Ron Ochu says, what power levels do you typically use with FT8 duty cycle for prolonged periods?
Okay, it's two things working against you. One is you're going to be jamming the CW tent down the hall, and so you got to deal with that. The other thing is when you go into this multi-streaming, I didn't get a lot into that. Essentially what you're doing is creating an audio signal that is composed of 1 or 2 or 3 or up to 5 different FT8 signals. But as you increase the number of audio signals, you're splitting your power, not linearly, but kind of logarithmically between each of those streams. So if you have one stream, that stream gets all the power. If you have 2, they each get a little less than half. If you have 3, way less than a third. It starts to make it so you disappear. And you'll see that if you see a DXpedition that's called CQ with one signal, they're big, they're strong, and then they click on and try to work 5 people once, nobody can copy them anymore. You've got to be careful that you don't pick the wrong value. Again, the Fox is in control of all of the aspects of the station and needs to judge whether he should increase number of streams to 2 or 3 or what. And it all depends on the signal strength that you see from the people calling you.
Yep. Another question. Are dupe rates very high for FT8 Foxes?
It depends. It depends on conditions. I mean, it's not higher than CW, I don't think, from my experience. It's about the same.
Okay.
At least for low frequency. If I'm on 160, you end up duping a lot of people, but it's okay. You have to do that because no one's going to come to this island and put on 160 like you have for 20 or 30 years. It's your job to get them in the log, whatever it takes.
That is right. I think we're at the 55-minute hour. It's perfect timing.
Okay.
Ned, outstanding as usual, and keep your eyes and ears out for Ned, because he's a pioneer in many different ways. He's working on a lot of technically complex but innovative projects that we're all going to benefit from. And the tremendous amount of work that you did, the groundwork you did to make this successful for Baker and the world. Just one of those behind the scenes success stories that not a lot of people know about, but they do now. So
Amazing story.
John.
Very happy to be part of it. Thank you very much.
thank you. Absolutely.
All right. Bye, everybody.
All right.